It turns out, folks, we've been lied to once again. Go figure. It's like a never-ending cycle. How much all the years we've been lied to, we've been deprived, we've been deceived, we've been propagandized, we've been brainwashed into every aspect, from COVID to Russiagate to Ukraine to Gaza and Israel to election outcomes to democracy to how our representatives function, everything between. We've been lied to, we've been deceived, we've been deprived. We have exposed a lot of great details, revealing the truth about this. And now, it's so surprising because Bill Gates, of all people, is dropping the ball on climate change. Bill Gates, of all people, Mr. Philanthropist, Mr. Wonderful Guy, Mr. I never graduated college, but apparently I'm smart enough to handle vaccines and deal with medical advice and go on television and advise people how to live. Mr. I never programmed at Microsoft, but apparently I am the greatest tech genius in the world, is dropping the ball on climate change. This is from the New York Post, saying Bill Gates makes major climate change reversal after years of doomerism. People will be able to live and thrive. So all the years we've been told that, the earth is dying, that human civilization is going to be wrapping up, that, we're in doom days. We've heard for decades, going as far back as the 60s. That's when they were starting to predict all this, crazy end of the world times and apocalyptic theories. It turns out never happened. And people like Bill Gates, people like Al Gore, people like John Kerry, and so many other philanthropists, so many fake environmentalists have been profiting off this, profiting off a scam to divide, to scheme, and to propagandize people into this fear. But now Bill Gates is dropping the ball on this. Very shocking, ladies and gentlemen. Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates, who has spent more than a decade warning that the world was on the brink of unimaginable peril due to the rising global temperatures, now says climate change will not lead to humanity's demise in a stunning reversal. Gates, who has sunk billions of his vast fortune into initiatives ostensibly meant to combat climate change, penned a lengthy blog post this week urging a shift away from the doomsday outlook many climate activists have adopted to terrify non-believers into seeing things their way. Although climate change will have some serious consequences, he says, particularly for people in the poorest countries, it will not lead to humanity's demise, he wrote. People will be able to live and thrive in most places on Earth for the foreseeable future. What? That's completely opposite to just even a year ago. When he told people that, hey, we can't save the planet. It's already too late. You got to eat bugs. You got to own electric vehicles. We got to transform countries' economies. We have to go to digital currency because the climate is so awful. We're already past the mark. We're already past the worst of the worst, and we're going to get worse and worse and worse. So we got to transform everything. Oh, I guess we can survive. I guess all the study that we have not shown to people, all the years of evidence to prove otherwise, that we purposely did not expose, did not tell people, we did not acknowledge, reverts to the fact that, the climate's been always changing. And in fact, right now, we're in a cooling phase. The Earth has been warmer in previous generations compared to now. And we're actually at a cooling phase. We're at the ending of an ice age. And temperatures are not rising. Ocean levels are not rising to catastrophic damages. We are not dealing with, circumstantial consequences compared to this guy. But he lied to you. He manipulated people to profit off it. Just like Michael Moore's latest documentary, Planet of the Humans, exposed this. They exposed the fake philanthropists, the billionaire class, that are using climate change to profit and scare people into submission, into their agenda. They are forced to eat fake meat, that you can't have organic food, you can't have farmland, you can't travel anywhere. You're stuck in 15-minute cities. You're on a digital ID because creating actual currency, tangible coins and currency is bad for the planet somehow. They made you believe that carbon, which we are carbon life forms, that is part of our life. That's the ability for human beings to exist, is a bad thing. That carbon dioxide is terrible, even though it's beneficial. It's an important factor of life on Earth. And I'm not a scientist. I'm not a scientist. But I did pass, kindergarten, first grade biology. So that's how I know about that. Gates, who just 4 years ago authored a book titled How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, and once said climate change could be worse than the COVID-19 pandemic, now argues we should measure success by our impact on human welfare more than our impact on the global temperature. The Control-Alt-Delete reset is a stark departure from his previous assertions that avoided a climate disaster, we will be of the greatest challenges humans have ever taken on. Greater than landing on the moon, greater than eradicating smallpox, even greater than putting a computer on every desk. Well, thank God we have a, phony scientist, a fake philanthropist who is best friends with Jeffrey Epstein on our side. It's great that we have a friend in need. A guy who wants to jab as many children as possible and then see what happens. If they get birth defects or die suddenly, whoopsie daisy. It's not our faults. The century billionaire philanthropist Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has funneled huge sums of cash to companies working on reducing global greenhouse gas emissions, including bankrolling a Mr. Burns-esque technology to dim the sun and redirect its rays out of the atmosphere. We covered that. The UK government, Keir Starmer, passed legislation to dim out the sun rays. That's insane. That's psychotic. That's a comic book villain idea. That's now happening because of people like Bill Gates. Now Bill Gates is saying, oh, we can actually survive? What? What? That's just amazing, folks. That we were actually kind of on the right side of things. Even though, at the start of this, I was kind of, I was the environmentalist. I was, and I still am in multitude of ways, but I wasn't deeply staunch in all this. I knew that carbon dioxide, was not bad. Carbon dioxide is necessary for life on Earth. Without it, we wouldn't have trees. We wouldn't have vegetation. That's the important part. And we never told people to plant more trees. This guy, Bill Gates, told us not to plant trees because of how bad the climate change is. Think how crazy that is. An environmentalist telling you not to plant trees because carbon. But wait, carbon actually gets eaten up by trees and produces oxygen, which we need to live. Again, all shows you the massive amount of scheme this is. He's taking criticism for flying around the globe to trumpet our impending doom due to climate change in a $70 million private jet that spews about 450 gallons of fuel per hour. Hypocrisy he acknowledges in the post, but assures he offsets his own staggering carbon footprint with legitimate carbon credits. So this is when I was starting to realize that the whole thing's a scam. Because, I don't really have to sacrifice anything. I don't have to give up private jets. I don't have to give up steak. I don't have to do anything to save the planet. I'm going to scream at you to do something, but I don't have to do anything because I could just buy carbon credits. And that right there was the warning bell. That was the gunshot. That was the moment that someone like me started to realize that this was a scam. that why would the top environmentalists that care so much about the planet not give a damn about giving not pledging to give up ride around on private jets? Like, we have the technology to do this on Zoom. You have the technology to conduct meetings over the internet. You have different ways to reduce your carbon footprint, but they don't care. Because, hey, I could just pay someone to hush up, and I'll just keep going on with my business. Astonishingly, Gates goes so far to point out that cold, not heat, is a far greater threat to humanity, writing, surprisingly, excessive cold is far deadlier, killing nearly 10 times more people every year than heat does. He even noted some of the ways that obsessive focus on lowering greenhouse gas emissions have negatively impacted the very groups climate alarmists have warned would suffer most due to rising global temperatures. A few years ago, the government of one low-income country set out to cut emissions by banning synthetic fertilizers. Farmers' yields plummeted, and there was less food available, and prices skyrocketed. Remember that? That was in the Netherlands. They went after the farmers. The farmers. The so-called philanthropists, the so-called climate activists, the so-called environmentalists went after the most eco-conscious profession on earth, which is farming. That's how you know it's crazy. That's how you know this concept was hijacked by the billionaire class. It was all a scheme from the get-go, and they tried to manufacture a fake crisis out of this to profit off you. So that hopefully the farmers go away and you get stuck eating Bill Gates' fake meat, the lab-grown synthetic crap that they want to shove down your throat, or bugs. Because actually having organic crops was apparently so dangerous to the planet, even though farming has been around since the dawning of civilization. Goes to say the country was hit by a crisis because the government valued reducing emissions above other important things. Yeah, they valued going with the WEF agenda, then they cared about their own citizens. Because that's who runs countries. We don't have countries anymore under their provision. They're abusing everybody. They're lumping everyone to one totalitarian government. And that's what this is. That's what this climate change initiative. You have to be sworn in to this cabal's agenda of reducing farming, of cutting off the food supply. That you have to demonize people that run a gas-powered lawnmower to cut their grass. How crazy that is. So, here's Camus to remind us. This is just a short while ago. Bill Gates just explained his climate grift in plain sight. He says only the richest can afford to go green now. So his solution, the rich like him, will catalyze the market by funding, wait for it, the very tech startups he's invested in. So just like the vaccines, where he invested a huge amount of money, peddled so much that everyone needs to get jabbed, everyone needs to be lined up to get the COVID boosters, and then once he profited, once he got out of the market and got a 20-to-1 return on his investments, that's when the truth came out. That's when he decided, oh, well, the vaccines are not exactly important. Because he no longer was making money off it. Just like he's no longer making money off this. He was trying to elevate the fake meat industry. That completely plummeted. So that could be why Bill Gates, all of a sudden, is now saying that climate change is not a big deal anymore. Because he's realizing that he can't make a profit. He can't scam people anymore. So here's him on this talk show here. Listen to what he says.
Today, many areas of emissions, like making steel and cement or aviation fuel, the green premium is very high. In many cases, almost double the price. And so if we try and do this brute force, only the richest countries or companies will be able to offset their emissions. Now, it's great that they're willing to do that, but we call it catalyst because by taking the resources and funding these projects, we're going to make it affordable for all companies and all countries to take the green approach, because we'll either get the green premium down to zero, which, as you say, for solar and wind, that's where we are. And so now it's just accelerating the scale up deployment of that gigantic electricity grid. But a lot of people aren't aware that, you know, passenger cars with the lithium ion batteries and electric generation, that's where we've made the most progress, but that's only a third of the emissions. And so that's why getting these other areas of emissions to be priced either close to competitive.
And I just want to pause there for a sec, because he mentions about electric cars, the lithium batteries, because they told you how great and environmentally sound an electric vehicle is. We've exposed this on this channel. If you go and look at the production to make a battery, it causes more environmental impact than drilling oil. Just to point that out. To have an oil reserves, you have, you know, the giant drill that goes and collects the oil out of the ground. That's a little location compared to a giant mine facility. Mostly in poor nations, we exploit those people, primarily in Africa and Latin America. We go and overthrow those countries. We start hijacking their resources. We blow up part of their communities and then extract all this minerals to create a battery. That does more impact to the environment than drilling for oil. In fact, these are the same idiots. These are the same ghoulish people that allowed for the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline and natural gas pipeline from Russia to European nations that caused devastating environmental impact. But they didn't give a damn. They never gave a damn. So that's another tell on how phony all this is. That's another tell. One of the biggest devastating environmental impacts, you blew up a natural gas pipeline, causing mass amounts of natural gas to spew into the Mediterranean Sea, into surrounding areas. Not a word. Not a word. But you have to switch to an electric vehicle. You have to give up eating organic food and eat bugs. You are the problem. That's what he's saying here.
Or actually completely competitive. That is the highest priority. And so going into Glasgow, you know, having this partnership, including with the governments as well, making this concrete, I think, you know, it shows the momentum that climate's gaining, and it, you know, shows that we really aren't ignoring the fact that India and other middle income countries at today's state of the art, they won't deny that the electricity and the shelter to their citizens that going for today's green premium would imply. So I view this as a critical next step.
So that was him when he was making money off this. That was when he was still lying to you that this is a critical next step. We have to do this. We got to save the people. Because anytime I think about a superhero wanting to save people, I immediately go to someone like Bill Gates. I mean, why not? He has a sweater vest. He's a nerd. You know, what harm can a nerd do, right? It's not like we have evidence over the years that Bill Gates has been a public figure, been this overlord, been this maniacal, sinister, evil comic book villain. It's not like we have any documentation to prove how sinister this guy is. Oh, yes, we do. That's why I don't trust a word out of this guy. But now, it seems like since he's lost his fortune in trying to build up the fake meat industry, and people are, you know, starting to question more about climate change, now he's went a full different approach. So now here's him on CNBC doing a complete 180 to that. Listen to this.
Bill Gates publishing a memo that suggests adopting a different view and changing strategy towards addressing climate change. It is a rebuttal to what he calls, quote, the doomsday scenario, which Gates says is, quote, causing much of the climate community to focus too much on near-term emission goals, and it's diverting resources, he says, from the most effective things we should be doing to improve life in a warming world. He writes, quote, "This is a chance to refocus on the metric that should count even more than emissions and temperature change, improving lives. Our chief goal should be to prevent suffering, particularly for those in the toughest conditions who live in the world's poorest countries. Although climate change will hurt poor people more than anyone else, for the vast majority of them, it will not be the only or even the biggest threat to their lives and welfare. The biggest problems are poverty and disease, just as they always have been." Now,
I love how they keep adding in that climate change is only going to affect the poor people. You know, when Barack Obama goes to Africa and tells the people there, well, folks, you can't have an air conditioner. You can't have an air conditioner. You're going to have to die out in the desert while me and my wife and my kids that are in Martha's Vineyard, on top of the other 4 properties that I have, don't have to worry about climate change. Isn't it also kind of suspicious that they kept telling us that the oceans were rising, that, resources were going to dry up, and yet you see billionaires, you see capitalists, you see venture capitalists, you see people buying up luxury condos near the ocean. There's still properties being bought up, still people investing in real estate in oceanfront territory. But yet the oceans are rising. Aren't you concerned about that? Aren't you concerned about the devastating consequences? So many things.
Spoke to Bill Gates in an exclusive TV interview, and I asked him to explain what he hopes people take away from this new message.
Climate is a super important problem. There's enough innovation here to avoid super bad outcomes. We won't achieve our best goal, the 1.5 or even the 2 degrees. And as we go about trying to minimize that, we have to frame it in terms of overall human welfare, not just everything should be solely for climate.
How much of your own view is a function of just contextually?
Again, coming from a guy who has lied to you, who has had a long-standing record of just the utmost immoral things he's done to human beings, that he views the world as his own personal playground, his own little laboratory that he could just experiment and abuse and just go full on against humanity, is going on CNBC talking about, well, climate change is still a threat, but, we can't look at this as the metrics of emissions. We got to look at this as the welfare of people. So even though Bill Gates is, going a different direction than he said previously, he's still trying to leech on to climate change. He's still trying to leech on this. Because again, this is a guy who spent billions of dollars on this initiative. He invested a huge amount on this so-called catastrophic issue that turns out it's not that catastrophic. This is him lying to you. This is lying. He is lying. All these years, lying to you. The people that screamed the loudest about climate change, the so-called environmentalists, have lied to you. Because it's a business venture. And now Bill Gates is realizing he's losing money on this. So he's got to change his tone. He's got to, revamp the marketing strategy, if you will.
What's happening in the world versus what I think you've thought for a long time about the climate.
Well, if the aid budgets to poor countries were continuing to go up the way they did over the last 25 years, then the trade-offs between climate action and saving children's lives wouldn't be as acute as it is now that these budgets are going down, and going down quite a bit. And so the plea here is to say, okay, let's take that very limited money and not have some partitioned off for particular causes. Let's measure it all in terms of the human welfare. How do you help those countries?
You were a huge supporter of the Paris Climate Accord at the time. And I wonder now, when you look back given that you're changing sort of the metric with which you use, do you say to yourself that the Paris Climate Accord and its goals were misplaced?
No, not at all. That was a key milestone because the countries of the world said, hey, this is a mutual problem. The temperature rise, the entire world will experience a temperature rise from the emissions from all these countries. So getting countries to commit was very, very important. The one thing about that accord that turned out not to be realistic was the ambitious goal of staying to 1.5 degrees. We won't be able to do that. Even if you took all the money away from health, you wouldn't be able to do that. So now...
Even just listening to this, he admits that there's no fundamental way to get all the countries to reduce the emissions. But it's necessary that every single country be forced into this accord, be forced into this agreement. It's peculiar, isn't it? That all these countries know that you can't, unless you can rewrite the entire formation of history, go through another transactional period. That's where the WEF is trying to think here. They're going to another, fourth industrial revolution to catastrophically change human existence and society. You can't reduce emissions. You can't reduce the emissions. And they know this, but yet they had to agree to this Paris Climate Accord because the rulers, the WEF, the globalists, people like Bill Gates, the billionaires that run and operate the world, the real evil, sinister mobsters that run the entire planet, told them to. They scared them to. They manipulated them to. That's just so fascinating that Bill Gates, of all people, is stating stuff like this. So do you think that's going to go and reach towards Canada? Because let me just remind people, Mark Carney is Mr. Net Zero. Mark Carney wants to transform the economy to a net zero, which is absolutely devastating for the country of Canada, especially one of our primal industries, which is energy, which is why Alberta is angered at someone like Mark Carney. They're angry because the fact that this guy is going to do catastrophic damages to the energy sector in Alberta, which is our number one primal industry for that region. And he's going to take an axe to it to reach a net zero economy, which is unbelievably impossible. Unbelievably impossible. You can't reach a net zero economy. It makes absolutely no sense. And he's also demonizing farmers. He's also demonizing other industries that don't go along. He even threatened companies that said, if you don't go with this net zero agenda, we will do financial restrictions on you. We will go after you. We will do legislation against you. So this is a green mafia, if you will, going after companies, going after industries that are sustaining the country. And it's done absolute damages to the country and its people. Mark Nixon says Canada is the only country on the planet stupid enough to tax, cap, and ban the very industries that make us rich. That's true. That's true. And it's amazing that people aren't screaming up in arms still about this. It's amazing that people aren't angry about the fact that carbon taxes are still on us. But, they told us that they're getting away from the consumers. No, you still have the taxes. They're just not telling you about it. It's going towards the industries, and it dominoes down for you to foot the bill. You're still paying for it. You just don't know about it. That's his evil little trick, trying to demise people so he could still fulfill this insanity net zero agenda. And to show people, we could show you all the evidence that reverts everything that Bill Gates and Mark Carney and so many others have told us over the years. But let me just show people NASA. This is back in 2016. NASA did a study to prove that the carbon dioxide was actually making the Earth greener It wasn't hurting the planet. It was making things greener. More vegetation, more crops, more organic food. That should be a bonus. That should be a bonus. And that's why I found it so interesting that none of these so-called environmentalists ever told you to plant trees. Because trees eat carbon dioxide. That's basic biology. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. But it does take someone that is courageous enough to step outside the globalist cult, if you will. So here's Michael Schellenberg, who's going to also tell you that all the fears of the oceans rising was also false. All the time that they told you that the water was going to rise and the polar ice caps were melting, that actually that's not the case. That's not going to rise to catastrophic damages. Like I told you, billionaires and investors are still buying beachfront properties, even though they supposedly still think climate change is a threat. So why are they investing in properties that they know is going to be damaged by climate change? Well, it turns out they might know something that you don't know. And here's what Michael Schellenberg has to say.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, has claimed that human-caused climate change has accelerated sea level rise. But that claim is false. There is no scientific evidence of accelerated sea level rise since the mid-19th century. As such, there is no evidence that human-created emissions have caused an acceleration in recent decades. Now, that does not mean that climate change isn't happening. It is. It simply means that it has not caused the sea level to rise at a rate any higher than one would expect without human-caused climate change. Not only that, but the top scientists know this fact and have deliberately misrepresented it for years, deceiving the public. In September, I reported on one of the first global studies of sea level rise that used tide gauge data, which is the only real-world data that goes back long enough to the mid-19th century that would allow one to detect whether sea level rise had accelerated, decelerated, or remained steady. Since then, I have exchanged over 50 emails with one of the world's leading sea level rise scientists, Robert Kopp of Rutgers University, and heard back from IPCC, NASA, and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. What I have learned shocked me. For years, the world's top scientists have known that they cannot prove there has been an acceleration of sea level rise, and yet they have told the public that they can. Not only that, in the process of this exchange, I gained a glimpse into how the scientists have been able to mislead journalists, policymakers, and the wider public for so long.
So that's Michael Schellenberger telling you that leading scientists from NASA, from NOAA, and top climate scientists and researchers have all proven that there's no scientific analysis to prove that sea levels are rising. And he's not disagreeing that there's no climate change happening. That's not the whole point. That's not the point of this video. I'm not even saying that. I'm not saying that, all of climate change doesn't exist, that we should not be caring about the planet, not be caring about the environment. But I'm saying that the billionaires that are preaching this are the ones manufacturing consent to propagandize, to fearmonger, to brainwash, manipulate people for their own insidious agenda. That this has nothing to do with climate change. This is about profiting off a fear-mongering. That, yes, climate change is happening, but it's not catastrophic. It's not to the point that we have to force economies and force countries and legislators and policymakers and scientists and academics to all go along with this. Because it's just absolutely crazy. And now Bill Gates, one of the top preachers of the climate change agenda, is taking a different tone. And my theory is the fact that, well, now he's no longer making profit off of forcing people into, submitting to reducing their emissions. So now he has to go a different approach. Now he has to rebrand himself when it comes to the climate change initiative, because people aren't buying it. Here's this guy, Red Pill Bot, also pointing out that Dr. Patrick Moore, this guy is the co-founder of Greenpeace, says that there is no definitive scientific proof that carbon dioxide is responsible for any way of the site of global climate that has occurred during the last 300 years. So the guy who co-founded Greenpeace, which is one of the OG environmental groups of the day, they're even saying that they can't prove that carbon dioxide and emissions from human beings are responsible for the uptake of the climate. And here's just a short clip of what he said.
I've stated publicly on many occasions, there is no definitive scientific proof through real-world observation that carbon dioxide is responsible for any of the slight warming of the global climate that has occurred during the last 300 years since the peak of the Little Ice Age. If there were such a proof, through testing and replication, it would have been written down for all of us to see. The contention that human emissions are now the dominant influence on climate is simply a hypothesis, rather than a universally accepted scientific theory. It is therefore correct, indeed, verging on the compulsory in the scientific tradition, to be skeptical of those who express certainty that the science is settled and the debate is over. But there is certainty beyond a reasonable doubt that CO2 is the building block for all life on Earth, and that without its presence in the global atmosphere at sufficient concentration, this would be a dead planet.
So that's the co-founder of Greenpeace right there. That's telling you that there's no scientific proof. This is all hypothesis. This is all just theories coming from these people. And the billionaire class, like Bill Gates and Al Gore and, Ed Begley Jr. or Leonardo DiCaprio or any of these people, even Greta Thunberg. We pointed out that Greta Thunberg, it was interesting that this teenager from Sweden kept going on to these boats, kept going on to these meetings with the billionaire class. Wouldn't you think if you were an environmentalist, you'd be angry at the bankers, you'd be angry at the 1%, you'd be angry at the people that are facilitating wars, that are facilitating all these military bases that are adding more emissions to the atmosphere? Like, they're the number one environmental polluters in the world, but we're not talking about them. We're not talking about, the Nord Stream pipeline that blew up. But Greta Thunberg all that time, went with the billionaires and partied with them and shook their hands and got friendly with them. Now she's, moved on from that and talking about Gaza. So she's no longer associated with that. But there's still a lot of people that are still associated with this. And as I stated, that doesn't mean that we have to reject all environmental science. It doesn't mean that. It means we have to examine and actually prove if the analysis is correct. That if the climate is changing, how so? Where's the scientific proof? Where's the analysis? Let's show some data, show some evidence, and prove whether or not it's actually happening. And since they haven't been able to prove that, and there's more scientific analysis proving otherwise, we have to go and agree with the people that are denying what Bill Gates is saying. And as he pointed out too, that CO2 is necessary for life. And that's the more sinister part, is that they're trying to reduce carbon, which is a necessary molecule for life on Earth. That without carbon emissions, without carbon dioxide feeding the plants, feeding the trees, feeding the vegetation, greening the Earth, we would not survive. We, human beings, animals, anything that takes in oxygen would not survive. And that is more catastrophic than the idea that oceans may or may not be rising. In my view.